Hi, everyone. My name is Rob T. Lee. I'm with the SANS Institute Chief AI Officer from Colorado, and I'm really happy to be discussing in a very interesting panel with three of my really good friends pulled in, all to discuss the 2025 AI Playbook, lessons and strategies for smarter, secure innovation. I'm really excited about this discussion about how organizations should be taking a look at AI implementation, doing it in a very secure way. I want to go around the room and basically open it up to who everyone we're talking about, and we're going to dive right into the conversation after our quick intros. Start with Paul.
Hey, Rob. My name's Paul Coleman. I'm VP of Information Security at a SaaS organization called Orgvue, and I'm based here in the UK, just outside of London today.
I'll go next. Hi, everybody. My name is Helen Oakley, and I'm VP for Security of Software and AI at SAP. And I also contribute into product standards like OWASP Gen AI for agentic AI and supply chain security.
Nice.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Veer, Chief AI Officer at Software Improvement Group, based here in Amsterdam, and founder of the OWASP AI Exchange.
That's awesome. Welcome, everyone. And, one of the things that just fascinates me about AI in general is that this has now become the dominant topic in almost every single organization, from how do we implement it, how do we do it securely, how do we lean forward in the business. And I'm kind of curious from y'all's perspective, Justin, you're sitting down with any groups, executives or CISOs, they're going to lean forward and ask what are other organizations doing? How are they approaching it? So I'm kind of curious, how are organizations doing out there? What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong? Kind of opening up the floor for, just what do you guys think right now? Is everyone just fumbling and they're all trying to figure it out, or, where is directionally true north right now?
I think a lot of businesses are still, looking for the best use cases for AI. And once they've identified where those use cases are, is how to put the governance in place.
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of pilots that we see on various aspects of security, but where I see real traction is SecOps, because this is where companies start becoming more successful operationalizing that with AI. But there are definitely quite some gaps on the governance side. And this is where we still need to put more attention, observability, and governance.
Yeah, I see the same. And I always try to comfort them, telling them that the other clients I work for are, they're on par with that. So everybody's behind, so to speak, but they're all motivated to move ahead. So I think that's important, right? The intentions are there, but they just struggle with where to start. There's a lack of best practices and clarity on those. And that's where you see some security theater, for example. They're doing something because they read about it, but they really don't know the effects of it. So it's, everybody's learning.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. It's interesting. I think to a certain extent, from what I've seen, I think a lot of organizations are struggling with just having core knowledge, and even ask the right questions, which goes back into, Paul, you just mentioned, the use cases. Do organizations even have, strategy down on what, is it just they're chasing a buzzword, or, they even struggling with the business use cases on, what they need?
I think so. And I think, there's an element of sort of paranoia here, right? AI is cropping up everywhere. It's proliferating, right across the org into different, line of business applications. And there's sort of paranoia that, we must be using it. We must be adopting this technology. And, I think from a security perspective, the challenge is to sort of maintain pace with that adoption, but also at the same time to maintain some control and governance. And, I think one of the key challenges for us is the inventory piece. Where is it? Who's using it?
Go ahead, Rob. I would curious to hear your opinion because you were one of the contributors into AI Act, and this is a very hot topic right now. Speaking of the use cases, what companies are doing right now to support that, and maybe using AI to support those use cases, right?
Yes, yes. And so it's about use cases, but it's also about being ready. And now that you mentioned the AI Act, one of the rules, one of the articles is that organizations need to have AI literacy training in place for February this year. And yeah, half of my clients haven't done it yet. I think that is testament to the maturity of many of the organizations. They are, though, prioritizing finding the right use cases. They first want to understand what they're going to do with AI before they're going to train people on how to use it, right? And what strikes me there is that the boards that I speak to typically ask me, so what are the things that we should automate or augment? What is AI good at? And I always say to them, you really need to start giving AI to your value streams. Give AI to the people, and they will start to explore. Give them the guardrails and the training to explore and know how to use it and how not to use it. But that's where the most successful innovations come from. If you look at the recent MIT research, I believe it was 85% of the successful AI initiative came from shadow IT. So actually IT that was not visible and effectively not allowed. But it took place, by the workers. The workers wanted to get something done and they experimented and they succeeded. So my main tip to organizations here for finding use cases is crowdsource it into your own organization.
I would like to expand on that because you talking about experimentation and crowdsourcing also build a culture that will actually support this experimentation, because some companies go on extreme of not allowing, but that doesn't mean shadow AI doesn't happen, right? So in order to build validity in the use cases, understand ROI on them, and also be compliant, we need to have a controlled experimentation in controlled environment as part of organizational processes and innovation and transformation in AI. And while it's controlled in experimentation, not just shadow, we can also build in security and aspects that I need, like risk assessments and controls around those use cases. And we're not only talking about security use case, right? It's just in general, the business use of AI.
Yeah.
Rob, you mentioned AI literacy as a part of the requirements. Like, okay, organizations hear this. What does that mean? What is the actual definition? How does the organization know that they're AI literate? And then Helen, I actually have, that'll come back to another thing I want to bring up as a point, but I'm kind of curious when Rob was mentioning that.
Yeah, so it's defined like as sufficient understanding to make use of AI or develop AI in accordance with the AI Act, which means taking into account safety, health, and fundamental rights of individuals. And that means that you can't give the AI Act to your workers. So you as an organization need to identify the typical things that can go wrong when it comes to safety, health, and fundamental rights in your use cases, in what your organization does, then translate that into a policy, do a risk analysis, and implement that policy in your tooling, in your processes, in your guardrails. And what remains is a set of rules, hopefully a short list, that you then need to teach the people in your organization, and be serious that these are actually rules and not just guidelines. And for example, what I've seen organizations successfully doing is tying those rules to the code of conduct that employees sign when they join an organization, communicating that it's really important to uphold these values and use AI in a responsible way. So it's typically a bespoke training on how to use AI in the environment that your workers are in.
I'll just throw this out there to all three of you. Does such a thing exist? I mean, you're saying here's what they need to do, but do most organizations know how to train someone in HR on AI literacy? Okay, Helen, I'm kind of curious in y'all's perspective.
So go ahead, Helen.
I think Rob mentioned it very nicely that you need to educate, and you need to assign ownership to different organization units and departments who own different processes, who needs to define the use cases so they understand, because it's basically break it down. I don't think there is any shortcuts to that. You need to translate it into your organizational use case. But in order to also be ready, and we're talking about transparency, this goes beyond into the technical system components level when we want to have that inventory and transparent. I think Paul also mentioned, right, some aspects on inventory. This is a very challenging topic because they have so many components, and basically the biggest risk right now is not about AI model hallucinating, really. It's really going into the what do we actually know is deployed there? What are all the components that we have in that system that represents AI system? As, for example, you access AI system. They don't say specifically model or else. It's overall.
Yeah, and I think, it starts with that inventory piece. And if you're in HR, for example, and you're using a background checking tool or a recruitment tool, that has AI built into it, what are some of the governance and controls that we need to be building into those processes? How do we know that tool is acting without bias or, providing accurate outputs? If we're onboarding new vendors, we're talking about procurement teams, how do we ensure that, or how do we identify that the vendors that we're onboarding are, if they're using AI, and if so, in what's the use case there, and what controls are in place there? How are we managing, risk around AI within our, we can be very good at building policy and documentation, but really what we're talking about here is like process, right?
But are we good at building policy? I mean, this is where I honestly believe, and again, like tying into Rob and how what everyone's talking about here, is that organizations are struggling on a couple things. Number one, they're being saying, "Hey, we need to use AI somehow, and somehow we need to accelerate our business processes." We see our competitors kind of doing it. We need AI literacy, which again is a massive definition of what the heck that means. We have policy, and everyone just, you just mentioned that's like, hey, that's something we're good at. But what I've seen most security teams struggle with, because they're not like y'all. I mean, you have to, think y'all are unicorns in the AI space. You actually understand it. You have the supply chain. You have, inputs into like how do you actually do the definitions. But I think most security teams are simply, when someone starts talking about half of what y'all say, they lean back, they start nodding, and they're like, I have no idea what Rob, Helen, and Paul you're talking about. So their governance framework ends up, since they don't understand it and they're held to it, in terms of reducing risk for the organization, they default back to something I call the framework of no, until they try to get their head around it. But the organization is trying to lean forward. Helen, you mentioned in the experimentation use cases, but also you need to do this inventory. So if your organization, like your group, is saying, okay, we need to inventory everything, we need to get the use cases down, but we also need to, do experimentation, which leads to, I kind of feel like I'm Yoda in the Force, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate. But Rob, you mentioned Shadow AI is actually building the biggest use cases. And I feel these two things have converted or converged, which is security is being held to a certain standard, saying solve all our problems. They're incapable of doing it right now. They end up saying no. The organization on the other side, normal users, are saying, hey, I'm seeing thousands of employees laid off from Amazon, Accenture, because they don't know AI. And so there's now double entendre of, not only you're supposed to learn AI, you might be let go because you don't know it. Security team's not enabling this. I'm kind of curious is, do you feel the average security team has enough AI literacy to guide even the governance or strategy in the organization? What do you think? Am I wrong? You tell me I'm wrong. I'm very pessimistic about this right now.
They have what it takes, I think. I always teach AI security as an extension of existing security practices. They know how to protect assets with conventional controls. And a lot of AI security is about, access control, encryption, segregation. All those things matter as long as you can identify those AI assets. And then there are a couple of new things like the input threats, like evasion and direct prompt injection. They don't need to learn exactly how to counter this, but they need to know approximately what it is. Well, they can be taught, and then work with the AI engineers, because those folks, they need to up their game and make sure that they understand the controls against those new threats. So by building on what they already know, don't be overwhelmed, and working together with the AI engineers, I think it can be done. I agree. We're not there yet, and one of the reasons is that there's very little honesty about expertise between security professionals. If you ask them a question about AI, they try to improvise, because they're not part of a culture where saying "I don't know" is really accepted, and that may be the biggest problem.
I think
Go on, Helen.
For providers, like let's say software cloud providers, it's definitely one of the best cases. Collaborate across teams, because you need to work closely between engineering and security, and a lot of that now blurs the line. So there's no like separation as maybe before with more traditional software, where we could have some teams working in silos, right? They really need to work together. But interesting, not all companies, not all organizations are vendors. So they are implementation security teams who have to understand it without having engineering part of organization. I think that's where also challenge lies, because how would they collaborate? Who would they collaborate with? And I think, so Rob, you're involved, I'm involved. There are a lot of industry experts that can help understanding this. So yes, it is a little bit stepping outside of your comfort zone, but I don't think there's any other way how they can educate and stay on top of understanding what needs to be done. It's all in a community together with collective brainstorming and thinking and solving these difficult problems of securing AI systems.
Yeah. I mean, to pick up on both of your points, I think, the challenge is that the pace of development, if you're a software developer, can outpace security teams' sort of speed of providing governance. But Rob, to your point, I agree that a lot of the risks are the same as they always have been. Where's my data? Who's got access to it? How's it protected? Sure, there are some new things that you've described, like, input validation, bias, etc. But it's the same. It's the data. We start with the data, and those same basic sort of risks exist. So we haven't got to reinvent the wheel here. We've just got to adapt, and learn some new skills.
But we say this. Okay, here's why I push you guys a little bit. We say this, but again, it's all about the data. Nothing changes. Again, all these fundamentals, I agree, 100%. However, you have Joe and even the engineering development teams. They're not security trained. They're taking their PRDs and they're uploading it into their ChatGPT instance. Or maybe they don't understand. There's like, well, it's a PRD. I don't understand where the data security risk for this might be. It gets uploaded. And then from some of the analysis that I've done and others have done, we're able to chip away at organizational data that's actually sitting out there and able to download full PRDs from some of the, these public instances. So this is where, how do you solve this problem? Is shadow AI the biggest threat? How do you educate user? This is where I feel it is different. And I'm going to push back on it. Yes, it's the same. But if you're looking at from the cloud, data segmentation, encryption, zero trust. But this one, it requires the end user, Joe and, engineering development to know that this isn't like just uploading something in Google Docs and you have something sitting in there. There's a fundamental change in the way that the data could be handled in these instances. And what are organizations supposed to do? Is it shadow AI is the first thing they need to concentrate on, or is it user education? I just feel organizations, yet if they treat it completely the same, they're going to be missing the entire security risk of what the Jill in finance might accidentally upload to one of these instances, and it's still able to be picked apart. And Helen, I'll go back to you on this one too. Is that these third-party vendors, do they even understand that their back-end models that they're relying on, OpenAI and Anthropic, that stuff could still be compromised, even though it's like passing through those third-party implementations? This is where my head explodes, and I'm living at a bar saying organizations need to somehow deal with Joe and Jill, but they can't treat it completely as the same data. I don't know. I'm threw out a lot there, so I'm kind of curious. You guys pile on, tell me I'm wrong, because I probably am. I'm learning about this stuff.
You're not wrong at all. I think one of the tools, the responses, is around awareness. We've had controls, and we could block access to file sharing sites, for example. We could stop those uploads. Those tools exist today, in this same conversation, in the same context. But it's very easy for people to find a way around those type of blocks, right?
You always find a way around, right? So
so I think awareness. You've got to educate.
It's definitely like we keep, I think, repeating awareness is the key, but also rolling out in a controlled and safe mode gradually. So first of all, yes, restricting tools is not going to help, because there will still be ways how to leak data and how to use them other ways. But deploying those tools internally in organization is important in a gradual, controlled way, so that we can learn on the small mistakes before we make big mistakes, and roll out this implementation guidances and education across. So while we educating our users and our employees how to use, what are the risks, so that they can consider, hoping they will remember, at this point, because there are no real controls that can prevent them from doing otherwise. In the meantime, learn from our implementations mistakes from industry and so on, and gradually deploy it.
Yeah, I think the key is, in a nutshell, to prevent shadow IT by providing facilities that offer everybody what they want. And for what they don't want, you want to be really clear that you did everything to provide them with tools, and other things are not possible right now and not allowed, and really link that to workers' integrity, and not saying this is just a tip. No, you have a real problem if you are going to take a stack of resumes and you run it to ChatGPT to find the best candidates. That's not what we do here. And I've learned that teaching values and the ethics of it requires quite some work in explaining why something is important, and it doesn't always get across. So you need to be really specific, and where you can, try to put in the guardrails in the tools that you provide. A winning model for us has been provide a range of popular models in the most hardened versions, so you can send sensitive data to those AIs, with, of course, some exceptions. You need to be clear about that and check on those, and then allow everybody to do that, and give them the training where the limitations are when it comes to the use cases. In that case, everybody is using the tools that are allowed and sticking with the rules, and there's no shadow IT. Well, of course, there can always be exceptions, but providing those tools and the guardrails is, I think, where it starts.
I think it's important. It's also important, Rob Lee, that we also consider different sizes of organizations and how they use the models. If organization can afford to host model internally, they can definitely provide a range of different models that internal employees can use for, let's say, chats and searching information that will not expose data externally. So you can really connect them to your internal data and use them for internal purposes. Yeah. And then you have to work on controls within the organizations to avoid confidential internal data leakage. Yeah. But then there are organizations who are perhaps smaller size, and for them, it's not an option to host anything internally. So they rely on external services. And this is where organizations absolutely have to do risk assessment. What does it mean for them? You know, like if they cannot do that, open source or other solutions that they use, how can they really trust that their data will be secure and they can share that data? So risk assessment is the first thing. I mean, it's a old control that we have in security for many years, but we cannot escape it. And every time something new comes, we need to perform this third-party risk assessment, understand what we use and where the data flows.
Okay, this is perfect. This is, you know, all over yellow brick roading this, exactly where I wanted to go. Okay, here's the new scenario. I'm a company X and I've hired you three. You know, I just randomly have enough money to, you know, afford you guys. Sitting down there and I say, hey, listen, I have like 10 requests from 10 different groups asking, and I'm going to go very specific here, using Gamma, PowerPoint generator that does PowerPoints in like minutes, and there's all the groups want this thing. How do you evaluate Gamma? And for anyone to like know, I'm not pushing a vendor tool, but if you go take a look, I assume all three of you have probably taken a look at Gamma at some point. If you haven't, then we have a third-party tool. Every part of the organization, you could be uploading a bunch of organizational documents into this thing. What do we do? What is our steps? How do I get this done? And what is the time frame that's expected?
Like I would approach, again, roll out to first group. Yeah, have a control rollout of the tool to specific licenses within your organization. So you understand if there is no ability to understand how the data flows between, and if there is this, for example, confidential slides that now could be shared across the organization that shouldn't be shared. You want to find out while you rolling out in a controlled small environment. So I would approach with risk assessment. First of all, assess this vendor, what they use, what they promise with the data. You won't be able to assess how data was trained, how model was trained, or anything like that. This is like a secret sauce of this third-party provider, yeah? But you can assess the risks, how they do it, what they promise you to do, what is the agreement that you need to rely on, and take that as an assumption for your risk assessment. And then work with your IT teams who needs to implement controls and see, do they provide these authorization controls? Is it possible that this tool would potentially be used for confidential data and what that means? So I would do that assessment and start rolling out gradually to users to see what comes out as a feedback, what comes out as internal incidents that you need to address.
Yeah. To add to that, I'd identify who's going to own the tool within the business. You know, who's going to control access. You know, what's the use case for the tool? You know, it may indeed be super broad. You know, there might not be, you know, any limits there. You know, where's that data going to be stored? How's it going to be protected? What's the provider doing? You know, do they have any credentials in security or AI?
Yeah, two things to add. One is the work that the AI automates at the center of craftsmanship of your organization? Then you should really wonder, are we going to implement this? I think this tool, this PowerPoint tool, is a good example. For example, for us at Software Improvement Group, we do a lot of boardroom advisory. Slides building is an art for us. So what happens if you bring AI into this? Yes, you can become more efficient, but how about people that are new to the team? Will they resort to the AI tool? Will they build up the perseverance, the creativity that they would build up if they didn't have the tool? That will be the first question that I would address. And it's a bit of a, are we going to automate this or are we going to do this manually? And it's not an old-fashioned perspective. Really, you should be critical about this. And second, to Helen's suggestion, yes, work with the supplier. And my tip would be let a seasoned security professional interview the supplier or look into the small print, because sometimes it says you will get your own private instance, but then when you zoom in, a security professional would ask, a private instance of what? Then it turns out you get a private instance of an API. Then the next question is, so where's the model? Yeah, the model is in our hypercluster. You mean your hypercluster? So my clear text prompts will be in your hypercluster. What monitoring do you have in place? It's that kind of digging that you unfortunately need to do, because vendors typically aren't really verbose about the risks of using their tool. So yeah, I guess unfortunately organizations have a job to do there.
And these third-party vendors, when you end up thinking about them also, they're in a rush to maintain competitiveness and increase revenue through subscribers so how, going back to the accountability, how do we hold them accountable? You could ask a bunch of questions, but for a lot of these third-party vendors, they actually pride themselves on being able to switch models inside the actual app. Even Gamma, from image generation, you're shoving things into and says auto and generate image from like nano image gen, going down the list. And this is like the third party, Helen, this is your area. Like, how does the third party vendor rely on other third party vendors to assess that data that's going from all the way down that line isn't going to be compromised when you're uploading sensitive company data to generate board discussions about overall company strategy for these? This is where my mind melts on, how do you trust this at all? I'm going to you. Curious.
Yeah, well, trust but verify, right? So it comes with the risk assessment and also things like supply chain methods and files like SBOM software bill of material, which also has AI models. So if you think about the whole supply chain of vendors in this final executive slide, when you're acquiring it, ideally, you would want to understand that this model has impact and there are certain vulnerabilities that could be in that solution, potentially impacting your results. And okay, vulnerabilities is traditional, right? In AI, with AI, it could be risks because they could be ethical risks, they could be framework and real vulnerability risks that could impact your end result. So today, we are in a blind spot of that, and there are multiple challenges with this, but at least we can start collecting our inventory to understand that once we have the across industry more or less implemented this chain and transparency, we can easily and fast identify where is the impact is coming from. And one of the biggest challenges I find in supply chain is that if we talk about ethics, right, and AI risks, we are tapping into things like how model is being created, how model is being trained. And this is something that, like I said, unless it's open source, it's a secret sauce of the vendor who offering you solution with that model or offering you that model. And I believe that there needs to be an establishment, let's call it certification of the models that can help us understand and trust that this model has been developed and trained following all the processes that we expect. Because honestly, taking that risk on end organization who's consuming it is not ideal solution. Yeah, we can't assess risk for provider needs to verify and confirm to that certification that they followed it as needed. It was a little bit long, but that's a lot of challenges I see in the supply chain. It's just lack of transparency, lack of understanding what these systems bring into our organization.
It's something that I think is really important, but it is challenging to achieve, right? Is if I trained my model on data 6 months ago, how do I know that data is still accurate? How do I test for bias? And I think those sometimes can be difficult questions to answer.
So to close this out, going back to the example, you're sitting on the executive team of a company, and they're looking at say, hey, we need to move forward on some of this stuff because we need to become more efficient. We can't hire more people right now. We don't have the revenue to be able to do so. I mean, this is like reality. So we need to do more with less. Going back to the example, and I'll go around the room because I'm kind of curious in here. We'll just assume you can't get to zero risk. So what is, in your opinion, an acceptable level of risk? Is it 50%? Is it, hey, we full trust of what the third party vendor is? They're asking you, point blank is like, how do I know it's good enough? Or is it, hey, I did due diligence to check the box, and that way I could just pass the liability on to someone else and hope for cyber insurance? How do you answer the risk question to executive team?
There is no zero risk, and there's no such thing as you can say like, I completely trust. Organization who adopting a tool from a third-party vendor would need to rely on the agreement what vendor provides, because if something happens, they will need to follow up with that vendor, with that agreement, and follow that track, right? And today, all you can do, the first of all, is risk assessment and build your inventory so you know what you use in your organization and who owns it and what do you do with this if something happens. I think if you have this information already, start building it today as you're adopting these tools, it will be easier to follow up on things. Always go wrong later. So when things go wrong, you can follow up on that.
Yeah, I think that the hallmarks, of success here in terms of risk management are, having that governance framework in place, having, the processes built in, onboarding of vendors that may have AI capabilities, oversight into AI functionality, how, if you're developing your own tools, how are you auditing them? What controls have you got in around there? Are you raising awareness among your employee base? Are you training them, looking for risks, AI specific risks, in terms of sort of incoming phishing or AI enabled threats? Those are, some of the things that I would say were hallmarks of successful organizations demonstrating good governance around AI.
When it's about ethics, when it's about safety, harm, and fundamental rights, things become really difficult. I've been doing that for the AI Act, try to set up acceptance criteria when it comes to people's lives and people's health. Super difficult. So I'm always glad that if I get a case that I can turn things into simple dollars, and probabilities. But even then, it's tough to make decisions. And what usually works the best is analogies. So when I tell people your clear text prompt will be in the hypercluster of your vendor, they typically get scared. Ooh, I don't want that. But then I say, yeah, the same happens with your Office 365 or the Google Suite application. So what type of data do you trust with your Office applications? And then they say, well, every data apart from this. Well, then the same applies to your cloud AI. There are some caveats, but those comparisons make it easier for executives to draw the line.
All right, last question, the rapid fire, one word answer. Everyone okay with the one word? I need not. Okay, so here's the question. Organizations trying to start out moving into AI, and let's assume, small, medium-sized business, we're assuming the larger ones already started something. what is the one thing that they need to start with? Example, governance, literacy. What is the one thing that they're going to start executing the playbook? What is step one of the playbook? Rob, your answer. One word.
Yep. OSPI exchange. So the exchange.
All right. Helen.
Inventory.
Inventory. Paul.
Training.
Training. Awesome. All right. That's it. There's a lot more to this. We could actually do a series on this alone and probably take each one of those apart. And honestly, what we really need to do is, go to a coffee shop or a bar and have a drink while we're doing this, and then record our conversations. Hey, I really appreciate y'all's time today, and taking this to the next level. I think organizations are struggling, and having you guys as a part of these discussions and doing the level of research and public advocacy is because that takes a lot of time. Free stuff that you're trying to provide the industry. All three of you are doing an amazing job, and thank you for your efforts and everything that you're providing for organizations to take the next level. And just for everyone who's looking for more information on what all three of them are doing, it is going to be in obviously the LinkedIn post and their organizations respectively. So you could deep dive, and I highly recommend that you do so for all three individuals, who they work for, and of course, who they are currently supporting on the side. So thanks everyone. My name is Rob Lee. I'm with SANS and appreciate your time. Thank you.